Hello, I'm Ayşe Süberker and welcome to the special edition of Strait Talk here from Kahramanmaras. 1 month ago, the area where I'm standing now was struck by the largest earthquake Türkiye had seen in nearly a century, measuring a magnitude 7.7, and just hours later, another equally powerful tremor struck, adding to the devastation. Thousands of aftershocks followed that continued for weeks. Since that tragic day on February 6, the country has mobilized to get out of its worst ever disaster. And the international community has also stepped in, providing everything from rescue teams to humanitarian aid. While many are trying to move past that horrifying day, for millions of survivors, the trauma is still too real.
On February 6, Turkey was struck by its most powerful earthquake since 1939. The magnitude 7.7 quake at 4:17 a.m. shook 11 provinces. Just a few hours later, another followed with a magnitude 7.6. A month on, Turkey has so far recorded more than 11,000 aftershocks. The reason? 3 tectonic plates converge on the Anatolian Peninsula, and the quake-hit regions lies where 2 of them meet. Seismologists estimate the region has now shifted 3 meters west. In the first month of the quake, the total death toll surpassed 45,000. More than 200,000 buildings have either collapsed or are no longer usable. The quakes have impacted more than 13 million people and generated nearly 210 million tons of rubble. On the first day, the Turkish government immediately issued a level 4 emergency. Then help poured in from all over the world.
Anything Turkey needed that we could provide, they should pick up the phone and let us know. We stand ready, as an ally should, to help our ally in a time of need.
Nearly 100 countries across the globe have sent aid and rescue teams, and they were helped by more than 400 dogs. Even in the darkest hour, with hopes about to fade, a man was pulled alive 278 hours after the twin earthquake struck. 45-year-old Hakan survived after being trapped for more than 11 days. The sheer scale of the destruction led to an outpouring of support, both from within and abroad. Qatar donated mobile homes from last year's World Cup to survivors, and Turkish citizens mobilized nationwide. People immediately rushed to donation centers set up all over the country. Many volunteers also helped Turkey's disaster management agency, AFAD, and other NGOs on site in their race to find survivors.
As miners, we are very used to this kind of pain. We have also seen our mines collapse, so we are not entirely stranger to this. We can enter the collapsed areas by making fortifications. We have also been working hard since day one, sometimes with 2 or 3 hours of sleep. We get a call at night, join the rescue mission.
Other volunteers help children cope with the psychological trauma.
Our primary goal is to offer support. They have been heavily traumatized, consecutively and repeatedly. There are big losses. For people who experience pain and loss on such a scale, the first way to reach them on a psychological level is to stand by their side and show them that another person can also see their pain. That's the first step towards healing.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced that more than 300,000 new homes in the quake-hit region will be built soon. There's still a long way to go, and healing will take time. But at the very least, survivors are assured they won't be alone in their path to recovery.
Work has now shifted to recovery and reconstruction phase. Joining me now to discuss all that has happened over the past month and what challenges lie ahead is Klaus Jurgen. He is a political analyst, and Mehmet Çelik. He is the editorial coordinator at Daily Sabah. Gentlemen, welcome to Strait Talk. It's good to have you on Strait Talk, this program, of course. But now we're at the Afşar campus after 1 month that devastated southern Turkey. So, Mehmet, how does it feel like to be in here?
You know, it's been nearly a month since the earthquake happened. Many have followed this event either from their television, from the internet, and some of us have also witnessed it live in where it happened. I think this earthquake, be it for citizens of Turkey or many people abroad, it's going to open a new chapter in our lives, because such tragic issues adds a new dimension to how we feel about our lives, everyday lives, and how we feel about our country, how we feel about our citizens. So I think, being here, seeing the rubbles, of course, it changes many things on how we look at life in general, at a personal level, but also I think at a government level, at a state level, it will change many things on how the states or the governments will see their citizens or the preparations for such disasters that are part of the nature, and particularly in a place like Turkey, being very earthquake prone, it is something that we need to realize, that we need to acknowledge that we have to be ready for.
So Klaus, what are your thoughts? I mean, what could you tell us about the scope of this devastation?
Well, when we came here this morning, I am still lost for words. For 4 weeks I'm basically lost for words. The loss of life, the suffering, the grief, unimaginable things have happened. Now this morning when we saw, like Mehmet said, we saw destroyed houses, streets, neighborhoods. We saw buildings flattened as if they simply fall in 1 second, and 2 stories, 5 stories. And you only see, and then you wonder what happened in between, what happened to the people who lived there. This human catastrophe, honestly, is something which will take a long time, first of all, for everyone who is personally affected and impacted. But I don't imagine anyone living in Turkey who is not feeling sympathy for the victims, for the families. And first of all, we have to grieve, we have to come to terms with the sheer size of this catastrophe. And yes, indeed, once you come here, you saw it on television, you spoke with friends and family.
Isn't it different?
All of a sudden you see it with your own eyes and you simply say, God, this can't be true. And then it triggers in. It is actually true. One day the rebuilding will be complete and Turkey will be stronger than before. But for the time being, we must make sure that those people who suffer from under the earthquakes have all the support they need, all the humanitarian aid, all the food and all the shelter. But it is heartbreaking being here.
So millions of people, Mehmet, are homeless in both Turkey and Syria. Turkish President Erdogan says that Turkey will begin constructing more than 200,000 homes in devastated areas and complete this process within a year. Do you think this is possible? And until the new homes are built, how do you think these people could endure these hardships?
Of course, it's one thing to build the infrastructure, the buildings, one thing. But on the other side, I think the human rehabilitation is part of this, and it's a big part of this, the century, the disaster of the century. On the infrastructure side, on the building side, Turkey is an earthquake-prone country, as I said, and we've had earthquakes before where the government had, swiftly responded into these devastating disasters and rebuild the infrastructure. Buildings were rebuilt, towns were literally rebuilt in places like Van, in places like Izmir. But I think the human aspect of it, it's something that trauma, it is something that will take longer than building the actual infrastructure and the constructing new buildings. I think in this phase, I think institutionally we have to be very sensitive towards every individual, every child, every woman that is being affected by this, and every man, every citizen that is suffering due to this disaster, be it in Turkey or south of our border in Syria even. International community's job is not to just simply send aid in, but I think rebuilding the human capacity in these places will be a huge challenge as well.
So because, Klaus, you have mentioned the importance of international solidarity. First of all, what do you make of the international support that immediately poured in Turkey? Is it enough? And do you think this is sustainable? Because, as you said, this reconstruction, rehabilitation will take at least a few years, if not a decade.
Well, my first impression was I was relieved about the swiftness and the speed of international solidarity pouring in from European countries, from all around the world, from a number of countries which had perhaps less of very active bilateral relations recently. Everyone showed their heart. Everyone came and say, what can we do? A few days ago, I think the foreign ministry was counting 102 countries in total had actually given aid and supported, and 88 countries had sent their rescue teams. And that includes a small country where I am based right now in Austria. You don't have to be a big country. I would actually say some of the bigger countries could perhaps have sent even more support and aid. I hope this will come, but a very good sign of international solidarity. You mentioned, now, is it enough? Of course not yet, and it cannot stop overnight. This is a long-term venture, and we must tell the international community what you did so far. Very welcome, thank you, but please don't stop. And I think the people in Turkey will not stop. Civil society, NGOs, the government, individual citizens, everyone will lend a hand. And together, I think this process, it will never ease the pain of the victims, but the process of rebuilding step by step can begin in earnest.
So the European Union will convene a donors conference in 2 weeks' time. So do you expect any significant outcome from this conference?
There would be two angles. Now, the first one is the actual donors conference in Brussels. I think the absolute majority of European Union member states will do whatever they can, both financially, both humanitarian aid, logistics, anything, what have you. But we must be honest, all of these efforts initially need hard cash. They need funding. I mentioned this previously. Of course, you have to invest in defense industries, high technology, any topic you have, roads and hospitals back home and everywhere. But you must invest into catastrophe funding as well, that you do not have to shift around budget and portfolios and then you say after 2 months, sorry guys, our funds just ran dry. European countries have the budgets, they only have to plan a little bit more cleverly. Unfortunately, a human catastrophe doesn't only happen in one place. This one is the worst I've ever seen. But now it may happen, God forbid, someplace else. Something else may occur. Countries must unite. This costs money, and every functioning market economy has the financial means. They only have to be reallocated, earmarked.
Okay. The financial aspect is, of course, very important, but just a month ago or 3 weeks ago, the European Union has agreed on tougher measures to reduce the number of irregular migrants, which is expected to rise dramatically due to the earthquakes both in Türkiye and Syria. So, Mehmet, what do you make of the European approach? Is it likely to change after this devastation, or the European Union is kind of or very concerned about another influx of refugees?
Well, they actually, in the initial days, they said that they will ease the visa processing for people that have families in the European countries. But when it comes to international relations, the day after is what counts. The day after this humanitarian events or the catastrophes, the day after is what counts and makes a big difference. Now, in the heat of the moment, everybody comes in with cash or with humanitarian aid, or rhetorically just showing solidarity and support. But this is an ongoing process that cannot stop the day after. I think, if the politics between Turkey and the European Union start to replay and start to play from prior to the earthquake, I'm afraid this humanitarian approach will slow down, and I hope that this becomes an issue that will be held above international relations, above politics, as we've seen countries that traditionally do not have or recently do not have good relations with Turkey, or Turkey has some concerns about its relations with those countries. They have shifted because this is an issue that can be held above politics. And I think this, the restricting measures should be eased, at least for those who have families to rejoin or to get support. In the countries like Germany, there's a huge Turkish community in Germany, or other European countries. They can ease the visa or speed up the visa processes, where this could add to the help that they are trying to provide.
So Syria was also struck, and thousands of lives were lost there too. So what do you think, what's going to happen to those people who were left homeless in Syria? Do they go to the Assad regime? Do they come to Türkiye? And what do you think about the international sanctions imposed on Syria, divided Western public opinion in donating or sending aid supplies to the region as well, of course, the northwest Syria?
This is one of the very disturbing events in this human catastrophe. Aid towards Syria arrived far too late because of the political and sanction problems you just mentioned. The people in northern Syria are suffering too. The numbers are not comparable, but we should not talk about numbers. Every single individual citizen matters. Every life lost matters, whether we talk about the thousands or the hundreds. And the people in that region of Syria lost their lives too. The international community must make one thing clear. If it is necessary to extend what my esteemed colleague just said, an ease of travel, even only temporarily, Syria must be included. At the same time, the international community should perhaps come to the realization that flirting, I'm very outspoken about this, it is not the exact topic, but it is somehow linked. The international community, Europe and Washington, must come to the realization that there are some groups in that region of the world who either flirt with terror or are actively engaged in terror. And the question is, who will make sure that humanitarian aid, financial aid, tent cities, anything, travel, easements actually arrive at the right address? So
the United States Department just reiterated the U.S. stance to refuse talks with the Syrian regime on disaster relief. So is the U.S. still far away from engaging with Syria? And is this about al-Assad or the Syrian people?
Well, I would actually add it is about a almost Western world, I wouldn't say global misunderstanding. I always quote General Raymond Thomas, who himself once declared that he, by rephrasing, saying it was a stroke of brilliance when he said that Ankara is rightly worried about branches of the PKK in Syria, so why not simply rebrand the YPG into the Syrian Democratic Forces? And he actually said, this is not a literal quote, but this was what he said in Aspen, Colorado, that he put the word democratic in there. There's a much, much wider picture here. There is the earthquake, but I would be so happy when a spade is called a spade, and someone who is supporting terror should not be supported by a democracy. So I think maybe what has happened now, the humanitarian catastrophe, on the one hand, will allow Brussels and Ankara, in particular Brussels, to come to terms and say, we must work closer together. At the same time, the international community must say, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys in Syria? If this, out of a catastrophe, would be a silver lining, forgive me for these words, at least we could work on it.
So maybe can we say the earthquake diplomacy created new openings for Ankara and with its regional neighbors, which with Ankara was at odds with for almost a decade? What are your thoughts on that?
To be very frank, I think the humanitarian approaches, be it due to the earthquake or forest fire, for example, with Greece, when a disaster happened in Greece or Turkey, the neighbors are usually the ones that reach out to each other first. And we had the similar issue with Armenia as well. humanitarian diplomacy, or earthquake diplomacy, as you call it, I think facilitates a platform for dialogue. But in the day after, whether this turns into a tangible foreign policy change, I'm very skeptical about that. Now,
Why is that?
I think the compromises are too hard to make when it comes to the disagreement issues between Turkey and Greece, for example. However, through dialogue, right now, if we are speaking that there is no dialogue, I think earthquake diplomacy can create dialogue. And a dialogue is the first step to at least talk about the disagreements, to talk about what they can, whether they can meet halfway or not. And I think going forward, we shouldn't need another earthquake to create that dialogue, or to create that platform, or to establish this diplomatic channel between, whether be it with Greece or Armenia. We have far too much in common than disagreements. I think if the neighbors come to realization without the interference of third parties, and I specifically use the third parties in Turkey's relations with Greece, or Greece
And
relations
Armenia.
or also with Armenia, I think they can come to reach a platform where they can talk about their disagreements and perhaps find solutions. But at this point, that third party element must be put aside from both parties, from both sides of the Aegeans.
So, Klaus, do you expect any significant shifts in regional dynamics, whether it be Turkey, Egypt, Turkey, Greece, Turkey, Armenia, even Turkey, Syria?
I can imagine. Now, for a long time, the Republic of Turkey tries to employ what many call a 360 degrees foreign policy. Now, some other countries were not so keen on reciprocating, if that is the right term. Now, faced with this catastrophe, unforeseeable, unplanned, God-made, this happened. No one could. Even the scientists say, yes, we knew something will happen at some stage. This is a wake comment. Is it 1 year or 100? Now, out of this catastrophe, I think one thing will become clear. Turkey has tried to become a very proactive regional player, geopolitical player. Turkey is faced by a number of terror threats across her borders. Turkey wants to create peace in the entire region. Turkey needs support to do it. No country can achieve this alone. Now would be the time when the entire region sits down. You mentioned Egypt. We have Syria. Then, of course, we mentioned already Greece, only a few countries as examples. Come together as a kind of regional dialogue forum. I don't know, I'm just making it up. Not a Europe of the regions, that would be something completely different, but a regional cooperation which may start with humanitarian aid, but then step by step involve civil society, involve business, involve politics. Dialogue is the only way to avoid conflict. I know this is a cliche, but sometimes we have to risk.
May I just add,
Yes,
Ayşe?
add, and I was wondering because, I mean, what are the shared interests of these regional countries in normalizing their relations with Ankara? Why? Why now?
I mean, actually, I just want to step back to the times before the earthquake. In the post-U.S. pullout from the Middle East, in the very recently, Ankara has already started that reconciliation process, be it with Egypt, be it with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, with the UAE. And I think the last missing piece is Syria. And prior to the earthquake, as you would know, there has been talks between the foreign ministers,
Sure.
and whether a leader-to-leader talk was going to be made possible was in talks. So that reconciliation process has already started prior to the earthquake. And I think Greece is an exception when we were talking about the region Turkey is in. But even with Greece, talks were initiated. However, again, due to some of the third-party interference, I think those were coming to a halt. So this process is not, it doesn't actually, this reconciliation or normalization process, it's not something that is starting with the earthquake diplomacy. It had already started with Ankara's with many other actors in the region. So whether there is an interest or not, I think the actors have come to realization that there is a mutual interest. I mean, why should two strong powers in Turkey, for example, Egypt and Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, UAE and Turkey, why should they be not even talking to each other when they could actually mutually benefit from dialogue, mutually benefit from trade interests, even when it comes to harder topics like defense, for example,
Yes.
or fight against terrorism.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.